Okay, so we just completed an outdoor imagery of Venture 13. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ryan now, who's going to explain what he will be doing with the photos that he captured with his $400 drone. And that is under the regulatory framework, or just comes under the regulation where you don't need a license and you can do this with at a reasonable cost. And this is not to say that you would use this for enterprise level activities using aerial imagery, but it's a good example of students learning these skills as they come up through the educational systems and start applying for the green jobs. So Ryan, are you ready to start?
Yes, is my mic active here?
Over to you.
Yes, so the biggest thing here is this is not something that's going to be necessarily competitive with $10,000, $100,000 commercial drones that are available for various industrial uses, commercial uses as well, but it is something that really makes this accessible for the average person. $400 is, you know, the price of 2 tanks of gas now or something, but yeah, it's definitely a feasible price that is not out of the realm of, you know, saving up a little bit and finding yourself a kind of a new toy, extra piece of kit to put in your bag. So I'm going to import all these photos we have right now, and while I'm speaking, we can kind of look at them. And the process of rendering it into a 3D model takes a little bit of time, so I'm not sure we'll have time to do that in this 1-hour session, but maybe by a little later on today, I can have it rendered and send back the finalists. You guys can have a look at it. Just to kind of see how that went. Yeah. But I've done a few other test models in the last few days. Last month, I've been working on some various projects, and it's kind of neat to see how those work with this exact setup. So I'm going to go ahead and import those right now. So we have them here on my computer, and we can have a look at them. And I can use them to show in relation to the other data sets. So we'll get those.
So I know that Mel Chatton, the GIS coordinator for the town of Coburg, really wants to get into using drone technology. I'm not sure where she's at, if she's actually purchased one and is using it.
Okay.
But we'll find out. We also have the Northumberland GIS Cooperative.
So here's the whole set here of the images that we just shot. So if we pull up any of these, for example, here is a quick sample photo taken with a $400 drone. So the amount of resolution, the amount of detail you're getting from far from perfect conditions, this drone can even perform even better, given that it was sitting still, not moving, but set it up that even moving, you've got perfect resolution on these solar panels. So this photo combined with the, I don't have a full number yet for how many I had taken, I'd say about 100 photos. You end up combining all of these as you pass across the building into this 3D model. So just for reference, if we start here, pop along, you can begin to see how these would all fit together, like a giant puzzle. But I will speak to that here in just a second once I copy them over. So if I go. And I believe we'll also have in this other folder. So I corrected, it's 150 photos we took today. So now that those are copied in, I will begin to process them. I don't believe the process will take a little bit of time. It actually takes far longer to handle the images, put them into a nice 3D model than it does to take them. So
what's roughly the file size for?
It really depends. So that was about 1 gigabyte of photos. A few more, about a gig, roughly, yeah, about a gig. gigabyte of photos. Those photos then are put into this 3D model that makes point clouds, meshes, all these things maybe you've heard of, but not really quite understood. They're often comparable in size. They are a bit heavy lifting. Most laptops and anything can handle them now. I do a lot of my processing on my desktop, and that's much quicker. So the limiting factor is a laptop that's a few years old might not have the juice to do it quickly and handle those 3D models in an efficient, lag-free manner. So the biggest thing is a lot of these low-cost drone technologies, they still have that ability to capture imagery that provides wow factor. So as you said, for conservation, for any sort of industrial development, to be able to actually take that image and say, here's our object of interest, our area of interest, and to show that to a decision maker and say, look at this. You know, drone aerial photography, if you just take a picture, it's interesting, but it's beginning to lose that wow factor. But if you could show somebody a 3D model and say, see here, we have this, move it around, that still has that, wow, I walked through that park yesterday and this is it in a 3D space. It really just has enough to, you know, create that effect. So we saw those photos I took. Basically, the process is pretty simple. You're taking a panorama. So this is an example of some photos I took in a larger set, but 3 images, which you can see fairly quickly. They have some referential points in them. So you can say, okay, here we got this road here. Okay, in this photo, we also have this road. So the process is that you need to stick these photos together. So there's all sorts of software out there, jams the 3 images together. You really don't have to do anything once you input the photos. What is it doing here really? So it's looking for what I said, reference points that are relatable between the photos. So here's the left photo, you have the right photo, and the last one. And you can kind of see down the middle where those photos were joined together automatically. And this is all done with pretty much 0 input. So once you combine them together, you can cut out any of the weird warping that you end up getting, and you end up with a wide photo that's 3, 4, as many photos jammed together as you'd like. Taking that to the next level, you can combine photos on multiple directions. So if you're to point the camera straight down, you've got those 3 photos in a line, but you can also go up the other axis and you end up with much, much larger areas you can cover and much more coverage of a useful frame of view. So this is kind of getting into more of the mapping idea. Now you have an aerial image of an area that was previously poorly covered potentially. So for reference, this is the same area that I showed in that previous image set. This is the best quality Google photo that you'd find on Google Earth or somewhere to say. Anything satellite based typically maxes out at maybe this good, slightly better, not fantastic. So with that same set, here's another area shown with the imagery I did. This is a zoomed in area of the bottom corner down here. This area right here we're looking at. That's about as good as you get with the Google image. Here's a poor, but still significantly better example of the photo from the drone. So you can get much better imagery to combine in with super basic equipment. So going back, you can kind of see how that all fits in, but that's still a 2D image dropped on top of a map. Not really, not that that's not useful, but that's not really as far as you can go. So the human body uses something called parallax to make our 3D vision. Other animals that aren't quite so lucky to have 2 eyes in the front of their head, they use parallax in a different way. So if you take that camera, which you would think of as the human eye, and you move it back and forth, you'll see different perspectives. And that's what a number of birds do, a number of other animals do. They make sure they're moving at all times to move their camera from one position to another position to then interpret where in space different objects are. So you can see this as an example. So if you hold your thumb out in front of you, you close one eye, you can kind of cover up the camera or cover up something you see. If you open the other eye and close the first one, notice how an object in the distance moves left or right. So if you're gonna cover up my head, cover it with your thumb, and look again with the other eye, all of a sudden you can see my head because now your eyes are filling in different space data. So for example, in this example photo, as we see in this demo I just showed, if there's a tree in the once photo and it's blocking a doorway, let's say, if you move over to another camera position, that tree is now moved in a calculatable distance and is no longer blocking that door. So from that, you can compute exactly where everything is in space. So the computer does all sorts of heavy lifting and says, okay, this was here, now it's there. And you'll also notice objects in the distance end up moving more than something close. So that's data that it uses as well. So from that data, with that previous data set of a whole bunch of top-down photos, you can make a 3D model of any sort of space. And that's what we're going to do with this Venture 13 data set. But I'm going to jump over here to this 3D model I showed. And you can just take it here and orbit around, seeing the full 3D terrain. And the more precision, the lower you do it, the more photos you input, the better every single result is. So this photo here took me about 10, 15 minutes to capture. It's about 100, 200 images. And you can get in and get far more, a much better understanding of the space than you would from any single photo. So from that, we can look and see what are the kind of the lower capabilities of this. So this is a photo of my house here we scanned. And what you can see is it's only 50 photos and it took me about 3 minutes to fly this. I drew a route up on the app, pushed go, in under 3 minutes it captured all 50 photos, plug it into my computer, and in under 30 minutes you have a full 3D model ready to play with. Given that it only took 3 minutes and that it was a fairly limited data set, it kind of begins to show this is kind of the bare minimum, and it's this good. So with a little bit more finesse, a little bit more practice, you can get far, far better results given, under, like, I think an hour is a reasonable time to capture an object of interest. You can get fantastic results. So we're gonna have a look at this model here of interest. This is a point cloud model. So it doesn't make any assumptions about what areas are missing data. So you can see it's kind of a bit ghosted where there's no coverage. Like it's when you're looking at a roof and there's an overhang, you don't see what's underneath really so much. So those appear as a void. But from this data set, here's what we got. So you can also zoom into these individual points. And these are representing each drone position. So this here, little pyramid we see, represents one photo. And if you look in at each of these photos, you can actually see which portion of the image they're contributing. So here is one, and you can see that it kind of shows the top of the roof there, the gables and the veranda roof. If you go over to another one here, if we rotate until we end up in front of one, you can see this provides quite a bit of data about the back deck, this little face here. And all throughout that, one area that seems to be extremely good quality is this bush inside of the garden. That would be because it's included in so many photos and there's so much reference data showing that in detail. So you can begin to see how if you're to put all of these different data points together with satellite data, aerial imagery where they do larger areas with a plane instead of a drone, you begin to get increasing detail right down to small little things as much as a garden or a single house. So given that there's some sort of platform that this can be used on, one example we were talking about recently was the Microsoft Flight Simulator. They've designed an entire globe using real data that you can fly around in. So that could be expanded upon any sort of open world concept where you have data from different levels, such as satellites, planes, drones, and then even getting down a little further, if you had people on the ground providing all sorts of data throughout the world in real time. So I think the photo we were kind of looking at, or the images taken every single day, I think it's 4.7 billion images every single day.
Wow.
So that's, I think, 54,000 photos a second. So not every single one of those photos would be useful, but considering there's a lot of photos taken outdoors, taken of areas of interest, that can all be combined together, given enough data. And it would take a lot of processing to do so, but there's a lot of inputs that could be used to make very accurate real-time models of the world we live in. So we're going to go back here for a second and look at another rendering of this exact same scene, taken with something called a mesh. So we're not just looking at the points, which are individual reference points. So we'll say in this photo, there was this peak of the roof, this one too, those two must be the same point. It'll take a mesh and it'll actually map onto a 3D model. So you can see this is much more like a photo you would expect to see. And there's definitely flaws, but certain areas are extremely high quality. And given that this happened 50 photos, 3 minutes, it's exceptional for such a, easily achievable thing. For somebody's first attempt, you could achieve this with very high success. So that's kind of a bit of a comparison. This is in a program called Metashaper. It's a little bit more professional. The other one I was looking at, it is called Reality Capture, and it's actually free to use to try out. So you can load your photos into it, render photos. You can't export for free, but at least it's fun to play with and just kind of get a feel for how everything works, what sort of workflow is required to do that. So going on, a few years ago, there was a project called Google Project Tango. Everyone kind of looked at it and went, okay, you've made a phone with all these cool sensors on it that scans the world in 3D. That's super niche. Maybe some developers might be interested in it, but nobody needs a phone with LiDAR and depth scanners and all these different cameras that you've added. It seems super gimmicky kind of thing. What do you know? A few years down the road, Google Project Tango is long gone by the wayside. The iPhone 13 comes out, and what does it have? LiDAR built into everybody's pocket. This little scene here, you can see that was scanned using only the iPhone in a few minutes. So you can begin to see all these technologies as they come into devices that everyone has, really make it accessible and bring the cost of those technologies down to a much more reasonable level. So this drone, all these images were captured with one camera. If you have multiple cameras for wide angle, close in, LiDAR as well for a little bit more accurate data, you can begin to see how this would really improve the availability and capabilities of capturing this data. So going back to that Microsoft Flight Sim, right now they're using real-time data to make clouds, weather, exactly what it would look like if you were there in that moment flying a plane. And they're taking satellite images, depth data, height data, all this different stuff, digital elevation models, and making a very realistic rendered world. So you begin to see how, given a bit of time, given a little bit more integration of all of this information out there, you can make some really, really interesting developments that have been yet to be made. So how does this kind of apply to conservation? Well, for example, say you were to do this over a park or over a protected forest. If you were to do this once a month, once a year, you can quickly see in comparison all these different photos and different models, how they change over time. So that could be something that would be super useful just to have an idea. And because it's accessible to the average person, it really doesn't have any sort of limit on where and what can be scanned. So I think that's pretty much covering most of the things I wanted to talk about, but we'll open up the floor for any questions anybody has. I'm sure there's some.
Well, we'll start here live. Are there any questions, comments from our sparse audience here at Venture 13? Seeing none, I'll go online. Anybody online want to unmute? Then it's my turn.
Your turn.
So this is cool. One of the things we did in the Portland New River Challenge is we came up with the idea of using this kind of monitoring data. They will have 1,500 sensors for the 12-hectare naturalized parcel of land that they've built there to mitigate flooding from the Don River. And so the idea there was to create a citizen science app. That's what they wanted, using the monitoring data. And we came up with the idea of creating augmented reality, where the students could be contributing to the science, but also learning the science at the same time, and doing it not just indoors sitting in front of a screen, but actually using their mobile devices and going out into the environment, that naturalized space, and then look at physics, chemistry, what have you, as a way of learning the science through hands-on and augmented reality.
Well, and that data could definitely be combined with that. If you have sensor 0x31, which is measuring water levels in a stream, that's not really very understandable. You could have 10 sensors and see this one was at 1 meter, that one was a little below it at 98 centimeters, continue down that stream, and for each of those sensors, that's not very easy to visualize. If you were to take and do a 3-minute same river section, which you could potentially even do faster, that's a whole house that's being scanned with about a kilometer flight distance over top. If you were to take something narrow like a river and do a small little path down it, only the area of interest, now you can plot those sensors onto the map, which you could do manually, or if you had GPS data over where each sensor is located. Now all of a sudden you have a 3D model that says there's a sensor here, 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 and here.
So there's a what?
A sensor, like a water sensor or anything, for example, you have a thermometer somewhere. I mean, going back to the house example, if you had a bunch of sensors around the house, one on the tower up on top of the antenna, one on the side of a brick wall, and another one down next to a garden, maybe in some shade under a tree. You see all these different readings coming out of these thermometers, but you don't really know why each thermometer is giving a different reading at 12 noon. Well, you can see now from this model, it's quite likely the one in the brick wall, it's in direct sun. The one in the shade in the garden, it's not getting direct sunlight and it's quite a bit cooler. Now come 8 p.m., the sun set, you go, okay, we're reading the same temperatures on the garden one and the one in the tower, but the one in the brick wall is still really warm. So all of a sudden now you can see in a 3D space, just intuitively, why you maybe are getting different data, where previously if you're just looking at some random Excel sheet with some data, it doesn't really make sense to the average person. So
You live in Coburg?
I do.
Real application in Coburg, where the result or the payoff might excite a counselor to the best how to use the tenant. Give us an example.
Example, Port Hope. They have a significant problem where flooding is a high risk. They've mitigated the downtown area, or mitigated the flood risk in the downtown area by changing the shape of the river so the ice doesn't block up, causing the whole downtown area to flood. So wouldn't it be neat if you could actually monitor that in real time? Somebody from the town could send up a drone, $400, and fly up and down the river, 3 minutes, maybe half an hour for a large area that's of risk. And now you have an accurate model from that day of how much ice is there. And you can take it, you can actually go onto the 3D model and measure how that ice is building up. So if you know that once there is this whole section blocked off, and now it's piling up and you've got a meter of ice damming up this one section, given the past data, that meant the water flowed at this rate. That means we have this chance of risk. So day to day, if you're just taking photos, those photos aren't aligned in any way. It's kind of hard to measure those without you getting somebody down there with tape. Now you can make a model every single day and see how that problem is getting worse. Instead of just saying, okay, it looked like there's more ice today than yesterday, you now have verifiable data that says, no, yesterday we had 1 foot of ice, and now we have 6 feet of ice. that seems like a much higher risk now. And the trend is going this way. If we don't get some rain in the next few days that melts the ice, we have some high risks. So
So
that's
Ed-
one area that I can
Yeah.
see that's immediately applicable in the local area. But for construction, for projects, for example, there was a video I was watching about a man that was doing the same thing, scanning work sites. You can measure volumes of gravel, let's say. So you have a big pile, you know that you're in a big parking lot and there's a pile of gravel in the middle. If you know how big that space is, you can select that entire pile and say, there's 200 cubic meters of gravel sitting in that pile. If you know that you need 250 cubic meters to complete the project, you could say there's not enough there. The contractor might argue and say, yes, there is. You go, no, no, we just scanned it. There's only 200 there. So instead of getting to that day, once you've leveled it all out and, oh no, there's not enough, immediately you've got that insight.
We should be able to come up with
we need to send them back to school so that they understand that this is accessible and that it's being used by amateurs and professionals. So rather than going out to the professionals and hiring a consultant to get a report in a PDF file, they just need to look around and see what people like Ryan that grew up in this community and is using this technology, how they might learn from that.
to identify an exciting use. Students could be the guys that once a week or once a day, sometime won't do that.
Well, that's what we did with the grade 9 science. We had the environmental technician from the town of Coburg take them out and show them how to do the water sampling at Brook Creek. And she talked about some of the disaster, well, not disaster, that's a strong word, but there were incidents, right? So one of the incidents was where a sensor failed and at Brookside, the diesel tank overflowed and it went right into Brook Creek, and somebody walking by Lake Ontario smelled it and phoned the police, and the police called them, and then they brought in somebody and they were able to mitigate it. The other one was from this industrial park that Venture 13 sits in. There were microplastics that were coming off of the packaging and going into the drainage, and it was affecting the Brook Creek and the fish, and goes into our drinking water as well. So they were able to identify that and come up with a very inexpensive solution. But if you don't know what you don't know, then it's pretty hard to be making informed decisions that are proactive rather than reactive. Those two examples I gave you are reactive. What they need to understand is if we're going to implement the principles of the circular economy, which is you fix things upstream, not downstream, then you need to have the understanding that Ryan has about the technology and what that technology can do in the particular communities in which it's being applied. So, and this morning we were talking about Nico and 030 solutions and this whole idea of creating this massive point cloud over top, and it's a digital twin, they call it. But I think if you add the knowledge that we've learned from this drone demonstration, then you can begin to see that it's not something that you're going to be spending millions of dollars on. You may, right? There will be people spending millions of dollars on this technology.
This particular technology, though, someone has to do the drone, over X period of time and X frequency, right? That
So-
doesn't have to be $80,000.
Exactly. So
No.
going from here, this, I don't know if you saw the first part when John was filming my drone screen here. I'll come up to the camera here. And show this. It's a $14 app to add on to this drone. And this is a $400 drone. This one's the $1,000. From this, once this route is created, it can be created by the user himself or it can be created by you can create this model, say, take that drone, look in that parking lot, you're saying turn it on, buttons, push play. The drone will take off, leave the route, and return back home. Zero input required. They're not hard to fly.
Yeah, so the hardware is peanuts, probably. But if you're paying the professionals to do the drone time, that's the big cost, but you don't have to.
Exactly.
Either be volunteers or students.
100%. So that's what I'm starting to say with this stuff is it's cheap enough, accessible enough, but if some volunteer or even basic trained worker manages to crash this into a tree, that's unfortunate. You crashed a $400 drone into a tree. It's probably not a complete write-off. If you have a whole fleet of them, you could reuse it or recycle it. There's a lot of options available.
I think that drone is $300 now.
It might be on sale for even less now.
Yeah, I think
When I purchased it, it was $600. Now it's, when I last looked, it was $400, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was $300.
so. The other application would be, we have volunteer firefighters.
Mhm.
You don't want, and you have regular full-time firefighters. So it's really looking at citizen science and citizen. Well, it's almost like in the United States, right? They have what do they call when they call the military out? They call out the Corps. What do they call that?
The Reserve Corps.
The Reserve Corps, right? And we don't have anything like that in Canada, but we could. It's almost like bringing the Girl Guides, Boy Scouts into the 21st century and using that kind of experiential learning, and also helping that contribute to the well-being of our community in terms of the physical and the natural assets.
Well, and expanding on that too, the fact that projects like OpenStreetMap exist and are maintained to a level that they are, says there's a significant number of people out there willing to contribute open data to this general cause. If you know that there's areas of interest, and it's public accountability too. If you're a large company that has a large environmental impact and you've been told you need to monitor whatever assets that you're in control of to ensure they don't leak oil into the rivers nearby or pollute in some other way, you may be reporting that your data is as such and that there's no risk to the environment and you're doing all your due diligence. But is there anybody really checking up on a lot of these companies? So for $400, that's change, like, you know, a lot of people spend that much in court fighting these different companies that are in their local municipalities. So if you could send a drone up and go, no, we looked at it yesterday and 2 weeks later, now we see that this is happening and you say it's not, here's a model showing exactly that happening. So all of a sudden that public accountability is held quite close and by anybody.
Yeah. Okay, I see some of, oh, you have a question.
You got a question?
Hugo.
Yeah, great presentation. I'm really interested in the idea of sort of community-based deployment of the technology. I'm sure you've been asked before, thought about it in terms of potential like privacy sort of repercussions with individuals flying drones around. I mean, the imagery of the house was pretty incredible, but you know, some potential repercussions of that, some less responsible individuals. Like, what would you respond to someone who sort of would say, what about the privacy issues with this?
Yep, and it's absolutely an issue. Yesterday when we were speaking to Steve about this, John and I, he was saying how they were mapping a school in a local area. And as you saw with my drone route here, I had to kind of cross over the parking lot to get a photo of this house and get the side, or get a photo of this building and get the side of the building. So the drone is not constrained exactly to the area of interest.
Yeah.
Does that mean you're actually capturing quality data of areas outside? Usually not, but you do. Typically that resolution is not of concern currently, but seeing the trends and how much better this drone is than 5 years ago, yes, that will be an issue. But I think it needs to be, if you're facing a public street, you should be aware that people walking on the street can see in your window, let's say. And this isn't really any different than somebody standing on the street taking a picture. So as long as people are responsible, it shouldn't be an issue any more than everyone has a phone in their pocket and could take a picture of anything they see.
Now there is Mapillary is a major piece of software that's used for, all the companies use it in preparation for autonomous vehicles. And when they do the video capturing, It will identify objects, but if there are faces, it blocks those out.
Yeah, there are definite hurdles that need to be understood, because yes, it's not black and white. There's definite privacy issues. For a lot of the reason, you look in Germany, and if you look at the coverage of entire global Google Street View, there's a big block in the middle of Europe that is not covered by Street View due to concerns over privacy. Germany has basically said, we don't want Google Street Maps or Street View in our country, and that's been respected by Google. It gets more complicated when it's individuals. You can't crack down on every single individual without, creating too much of a problem, because it is not one entity anymore that's responsible for this data being uploaded to wherever it may be uploaded to. So yes, it is an issue and it will be addressed, but it's the same as privacy laws. If you're asked to stop recording this and you cannot, for example, in this situation, somebody at the CCC was saying, hey, I saw the drone, I didn't really like that. We were playing this private soccer game, we didn't want your drone to take a picture of it. I could show them and say, look, you're not covered in these photos. And when the model's created, you can crop that out and upload just the area of interest. But it's an issue, and that will need to be addressed, and may not ever be perfectly addressed.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because in Canada, we currently don't have we have not updated our privacy legislation. It is in the works for the digital economy, but it's not quite there. And you'll remember the Quayside project in Toronto, which is right where the Maidan project was, next to it. And Sidewalk Labs, they pulled out because of the privacy issue and all the blowback they got from Civic Tech Toronto folks. I'm a member of that. And it was around the privacy. And Anne Kabarkia, who is Ontario's former privacy commissioner, was actually hired by Sidewalk Labs, Waterfront Toronto, to design what her framework is, privacy by design. And now she has one called privacy by default. So the whole idea is that you begin with the principle that all personal information should be protected. And then you need explicit consent from those individuals in order to use that personalized data. And I think the technology will enable that, especially when we get what's called a digital ID. So the governments are working on this digital ID. It will replace the social security and all the other unique identifiers we have for different services that we access from the government. But like Ryan said, it's a big debate. And the reason that I'm involved in all this big tech stuff, and then I'm the digital innovation lead for Sustainable Coburg, is to bring this awareness to young people so they can use all this exciting technology, but they have to ask the questions, how can we use it and do no harm? Google, their motto is do no evil. But as we saw from Jack Polson, who was the AI researcher for Google here at Venture 13 in 2019, he just assumed another department told him, oh, don't worry, we're looking after privacy. And then when it was ready to roll out, he said, well, where's the privacy framework? And they hadn't really completed it all. And that is a big danger with a lot of the governments, because especially the smaller municipalities, they don't have the capacity to hire these experts. And therefore they end up with an expert report on whatever it might be, cybersecurity or privacy, and it just sits on the shelf because they don't know how to implement it and they don't have the capacity to implement it. And so as we move into this digital technology and digital economy, it's very important that the decision makers begin to understand this technology. They don't have to be experts, but they have to be able to ask the right questions and make sure that they're getting the right answers.
So I just wanted to pick up on something that you said, Jonathan, with regards to privacy issue, just before I leave. And that is, in the good old days, if you wanted to take a picture of somebody, you went up to them and said, do you mind if I take your picture? Or do you mind if I take a picture of your fill in the blank? And there was that interface between the two people, and it was acknowledged that they needed to ask permission. the permission was either given or not, and then you moved on. So in a way, I think that's really what we're talking about here. So it's not so much, in my view, about privacy, it's about permission. It's about getting the permission of whoever is going to be involved in the scope of the digital work that you're doing with the drone, that they are aware and that they give permission for whatever the end result is going to be for having this done is okay with them. So I'm trying to shed a different perspective on rather than about privacy, because I think that's an overused term that really, in my view, doesn't really apply. What we're talking about really is just etiquette, permission. This is your property. May I? No. Okay. Yes. Thank you. And yes, I'm using it to do a map. Or yes, you can have an example of what it is that I've done. So that interchange, I think, is an element that maybe can be explored a little bit more.
Yes.
Well, that makes sense as long as the horse is still in the barn. But to ask machines to ask permission and to behave ethically when the satellites are taking images all the time.
Okay, it's apples and oranges because the drone is not a satellite.
But that's currently. The trends going, if you look at Google Satellite View from 15 years ago, you can see your house as a blurry blob and you go, oh, yes, that's my house down there.
Right.
Whereas now I can see individual plants in my mom's garden. It's not that is, it becomes a case of where do you draw the line? When is your
Exactly.
privacy being invaded? As a person who's concerned about this, and I don't think that we shouldn't be concerned about this. You know, there's satellites that can track individuals on the ground. We know they exist up there. Are they publicly available on Google Earth? Not yet. But as we see with the war in Ukraine, they have satellites that can do some pretty amazing things.
Yeah.
And it is only a matter of time before the costs come down, such as this drone. 5 years ago, you couldn't get anything for under $2,000 that was this good. Now it's $400.
My point is simply that we're civilized.
Yes, and I agree 100% with that.
We're
It
not
just
machines.
becomes, as John was saying, out of control of who do you speak to when Google has something up there that's taking your image or whatever corporation is in charge.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
the interesting questions. Take care.
So are there any questions from our online audience? Nico, you're in Germany, and we had an example of Germany. I just came back from Germany, and I know just from following Germany's history on this and the European Union's position on the general data protection regulation and then the new algorithm framework that they're introducing, that they're really looking at how do we balance the GDPR with the algorithmic regulations that will help Europe to compete against China, the United States, those two being the biggest competitors in this whole new digital economy that uses algorithms. Do you want to comment on it from a German perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, we have this history of the GDR, right, and also the Third Reich, where they had the secret police. So everybody's very much concerned. And the GDR is not that long ago, right? So everybody's very, very concerned about their personal privacy. And I think, I mean, Google Street View, it does exist, but you can object to be in there basically. So also GDPR requires the faces to be blurred, I think, and also number plates, so that should be anonymized. And also you can ask your house to be removed from Google Street View. So I don't think it's like an issue to do it per se, but it's.
I think it's more Google has.
Google, I think, yeah.
I think I was saying Google seems to have more avoided the issue by not providing it there, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. That's my impression also. So if you look in big cities, it does exist, but I was very much surprised how much Street View there is in other countries.
Yes.
Because, in Germany it's really patchy, but yeah.
Yeah, and Steve just put in the chat a link to the Ontario's strategy. The link is entitled Modernizing Privacy Ontario, Empowering Ontarians and Enabling the Digital Economy. It's a white paper. Steve, do you know when this was published?
Yeah, I believe it was published in 2020, and essentially it's going to culminate in a new AMFIPA, essentially.
Can you explain what AMFIPA is for those that don't know?
Yeah,
that?
sure. Sorry. So AMFIPA is municipal freedom of privacy and information, something. And essentially, it's a law that governments in Ontario must follow in the handling and storage and collection of personal information. It speaks to things like personal information banks and stuff like that that municipalities have to, and all government agencies in Ontario have to follow. And so this white paper is really a modernization of that, of those laws, which were really quite dated in that sense. So hopefully this is good for Ontario. Just FYI, there's also Bill 64 out of Quebec, which is similar. It's highly respected as, you know, of sort of a next generation of GDPR in Quebec, essentially. So it's happening. These things are moving forward. You know, what I would love to see is consistency. I would love to see, like, instead of all these different laws across Canada, why don't we come up with one? I mean, that would be great. We have many right now, and we probably don't need many, although I'm not a lawyer, so. But from a technology standpoint, it would make a lot more sense if we had one, because that would make it easy to follow for everybody.
Yeah, they call that cooperative federalism, but the cooperation is often missing from that relationship between the federal government and the provincial governments. Great, so this has been fantastic. Lots to chew on here, Ryan, and hopefully what we can do is we've taped this and we can chunk it into lessons that we can take out to the schools.
Absolutely.
And the hackathon has been extended to May the 27th. And ideally, we'll be able to get some university students who will have finished their exams and now have some breathing space and want to get outdoors and do some stuff with this digital technology and maybe earn some prizes.
Absolutely.
So we'll get the word out there and continue our efforts at going out to the schools with these opportunities and engage the staff that are keen and interested in this technology and how they might use it in their own professional career development and how that would benefit the citizens of Cobourg and our neighbors. So I want to thank everybody for being with us today and participating. I want to thank our presenters from the workshops on Thursday and our backup team with the feed loop and the Zoom for those 2 days. And I also want to thank Ryan Warner here. He's with the Venture 13 and he's been the guy behind the camera, so to speak. And I think that you'll agree that the experience, this hybrid experience, is probably the right way to go, where we can do outdoor activities like Ryan and live stream it and then bring it back into the classroom. And we have this environment where the natural and the built environment are interconnected and are used as platforms for lifelong learning. So stay with us for the next couple of months. I will be following up. I'm going to do lots of notes from the materials that we pulled together. And then ideally, my ambition would be to get the 030 and solutions and the local utility and their consortia checks and the conservation authorities together to do some kind of a pilot. What do you think, Nico? Can we talk Julie into that?
Sounds amazing. Sounds very cool. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thanks for organizing. It was fun.
And I'm going to be back in Germany in September. So I think you guys are going to have to do a trip to Dusseldorf.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll buy the coffee or the beer, sorry.
Exactly, beer is better.
Yeah. Okay, vielen Dank und alles Gutes, yeah?
Danke, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, well, thank you for organizing that as well, John, and everybody else involved. It's been a pleasure speaking here today, and I'm more than happy to see where this goes. Hopefully we can get some more interest and get some people working with this.
Yeah, and I do want to say, Mike, just before you sign off, that we are going to look at how do we connect up 2D, 3D, and create a continuum of use of this technology, because you don't need the $1 million drones. You don't need the $400 drones to do this analysis using some of the data that's available, like the one that we did with the 2D maps.
Well, I was going to say, with Scribble Maps, you can do image overlays and you can import drone imagery. So we can work with that. It's just not automated, but all that footage that you're taking.
Okay, so maybe you're up to, we could do a little session on that once we get the Venture 13.
Yeah.
data.
And if anybody has more questions and is interested in the platform, I'm going to put my email in the chat. It's just simple, mike@scribblemaps.com. So you can reach out to us there. But we're excited to not only, we're very excited to be part of this hackathon, but we'd love to work with other industries and help change the world, right? Through mapping and technology. So there was, not to be too long-winded, but Elizabeth May had a great speech when Zelensky was addressing her in Parliament. And, you know, we're a small country here in Canada, but we can and have done great things when we work collectively and put our mind to it. So remember, every technological advancement we see now once was an unattainable goal for people. It was an impossible solution, but we have gotten there. So if we do work together and collectively pool our resources together, we can achieve great things. And we have the technology to do so now.
That's fantastic. Let's end it there.
All right, was great meeting
Thank
everyone.
you from Good as well, guys.
Oh, geez, yeah. Keith.
Yeah, big thank you from Good for sure. Wonderful. Thanks a
Okay.
lot.
All right. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Take care.